Peter. I've been teaching at IIT for a little bit over 7 years, and I was given the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. I want to make a couple of comments first. Bill Hagestad is retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Marine Corps, but he's in many ways he's still serving the United States as a researcher, particularly in the area of Chinese cyber warfare. He's the author of this book, 21st Century Cyber Warfare. And I was asked by one of my colleagues, Louis McHugh. He called me up back in December and he said, do you know a really good cyber warfare speaker we could have come talk to us? I instantly thought of Bill. And so sure enough, he was available, thank goodness. And so we worked it out. He said yes. And so we've tried to promote this because we think it's a very important topic, and there's hardly a week that goes by that you don't hear something exciting about cyber attacks and cyber warfare. The thing I would like to share with Bill is that we're honored to have you here, but we're very proud of the Illinois Institute of Technology. This is the place that one of our graduates, Marty Cooper, invented something that's touched all our lives, the cell phone. And everybody that's practically living indoors and active in society has a cell phone, and that came out of IIT. So I'd like Bill to understand that we have some very bright, talented faculty, and we take pride on the fact that we have very smart, talented students. So I would go so far as to say that in the not too distant future, we will have graduates or people that come out of IIT that will make contributions to solve this problem that you're going to address, this cyber conflict, cyber attack problem that you're going to talk about today. So with no further ado, it's a distinct honor to introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Bill Hagestad.
谢谢您，我的名字是何伟立。些人听懂吗？没有。当了1983年，我开始学习汉语，在南开大学。些人听懂吗？你听懂？哦，好，谢谢。以后呢？对不起，当了下年我在中国人民共和国，解放军给我一个飞机便宜。Did anyone understand what I just said? That is not surprising because in all the audiences in these many years, including many in DC and areas where I would think that there would be people that would understand my opening soliloquy, maybe 25. 15 of those were mainland Chinese. The rest were who knows what they might have been. None of them were in the information security or information assurance world at all, which pains me. Because if I code in Mandarin and you're using the latest Western technology, I can punch right through it. There's not a damn thing you can do. All right. So there's the abstract. You've read that. I'm not going to read any of my slides to you. I may reference them. Some rules of engagement. We didn't give a safety briefing, Bill. Okay, so if you hear a fire alarm, it's no shit. You better get up and run. Everybody knows where the exits are. If I use any terms or words or acronyms, as Marines are apt to do, please stop me if you don't understand what I'm saying. Likewise, I can multitask really well usually, so please interrupt and ask questions. If there's something I say that you don't understand, please stop me. Or you can hold all questions till the end. Doesn't matter to me. I am here for you. Some of you may have thought that I was going to talk about Russia and Iran and North Korea. I can certainly address those as I've given briefs on those. This is an unclassified briefing. And if you go somewhere where I can't, I will let you know that. All right. So has anyone in the room been to China besides me? Anybody been in the last 5 months as a guest of the PLA besides me? Oh dear. When you look at this map up here, this gives you an idea that they are the Middle Kingdom. They are the central country on the planet, and everything else is subservient to them. From this point forward, when you think of or hear of China, please remember two characters. You can see them up there on the slide. I'm going to use simplified. They are Zhong, which means middle, and the character below that means Guo, which is the king or the queen surrounded by the four borders of his or her country, thus the Middle Kingdom. If you are not Chinese, you are nothing. That is the way they view you. If I say something controversial, you got to stop me. Otherwise, I'll continue to roll. As Bill has alluded to, I've written a number of books. The first one that he has there. Can we pass that around, Bill?
Sure, please.
And by the way, you don't write books to make money. You do not. You write a book because it's an idea that is otherwise not out there. I used to think that my books were banned in China until I went last September, and a Chinese government official leans across the table and says, "We know who you are, and we appreciate the fact that you're doing what you're doing. We use your book as a reference manual." So I can't make this stuff up, believe me. Right, Melanie? I've told you some stories. That says that my books used to be banned because a BBC interviewer, we did a Skype session a couple of years ago, kept getting interrupted. No surprise there. She said my book was banned. It is not. The other 3 books that I've written, one of which I've taken off of Amazon, are also not banned there. So I think that's interesting. Everyone in this room has been hacked. Good. Nobody's going to say they haven't. Do I have any government officials in the room that are going to admit that? Good, because I was in a country where somebody did raise their hand. And the information assurance professionals all kind of took them to task. So we all got that out of the way. That means you're being hacked right now, believe it or not. That's why you're at this fine conference, I imagine, trying to learn how not to do that. Okay, so when we talk about adversaries in cyberspace, we definitely have to have some sort of roadmap. As you look to the left and to the right and behind me, we have everything from nation states during peacetime and wartime to those cyber collectives such as LulzSec, the Anons, etc., etc. Each one has a motivation and a different reason for attacking systems that are vulnerable. Today we're only going to talk about 2 of those categories, which are nation states during peacetime and wartime, specifically the People's Republic of China. Okay, so let's go to China. As you can see, it is definitely still a communist country. Can anybody tell me what is wrong with that representation of China right there? Because I had a doctor at a clinic that I was speaking, it was a hospital in Central America, Central United States, sorry, and he got so upset with me when I showed this picture. He said, "That is not an accurate representation of China." And I said, "Yes, I know that."
Includes Tibet, includes Taiwan.
Thank you, sir. An educated man.
And Tibet.
Yes, but for the purposes of this, yes. I said, this is not our perspective. This is the Chinese perspective. Taiwan is the renegade province, that second state, that they are willing to come back into the fold. Guess who they're not allowing to enter into the Asian Interdevelopmental Bank? Taiwan, until they agree to being Chinese. So let's go to the binary revolution. How about some regional awareness, some current stuff? A lot of stuff happening, right? Like what? Anybody heard about these 2 little things? Greatfire.org. What are they? They're a reverse proxy that tells you if your website has been blanked or stopped in China for viewing. Has anybody gone out and put the university's website up on this to see if it's blocked there? You have not? Really? Well, the Chinese are taking exception because what they are doing is they actually use this to see if there is content that is inappropriate for the Chinese people, and then they're checking it off of Great Fire. What they did find is that there were some websites that were anti-communist regime. They were referring to the Tibetan culture, the Uyghur culture, which is now their anti-terrorism problem. And they said, we cannot have the rest of the world seeing China in this light. So what did they do? They DOSed them. And if you look at the 2 organizations inside China that are responsible for this, I think it's rather humorous. It's the Cyberspace Administration of China and Cyberspace Affairs for the People's Republic of China that are responsible for this. So they say. What about some other stories? What happened here? Google and Mozilla are refusing to recognize the certificate authority based on the People's Republic of China. They're saying that it's crap and it cannot be trusted. See that little organization at the bottom there, the China Internet Network Information Center? That's a mouthful. They came out and said, how could a Western company tell us as a Chinese certificate authority that they are not valid? How could they do that? So you can see it's a little bit of a tete-a-tete. Who's heard of the Great Cannon? Oh, everybody in the room that's in this business better raise their hand. So what is that? It's a reverse or alternate JavaScript, isn't it? Who's heard of Baidu, the Baidu search engine? They were using that for massive DDoS attacks based on the browsing habits of the Western world to DOS sites that are not acceptable to China. I think it's rather humorous. They're using our own strength and freedoms against us. Nothing wrong here, is there? And then, of course, we heard about the recent report by one of the major companies in the San Francisco Bay Area, said that there was a campaign of 10 years in duration that had been going on where Chinese attackers allegedly were attacking Southeast Asian governments and nation states. Went on for 10 years, and they just discovered it. What does that say about their technology? Anyone? What? No, I mean the people that recognized, that finally discovered it after 10 years. Uh-huh. Interesting. Now what about Operation China? Who's heard of this? The Anons are taking exception to the fact that the Chinese police are restricting the freedoms and movements of the Hong Kong people, Xianggang-ren. So what they're doing is, they're taking to task the Chinese police sites. If you look up here, you can see every one of their sites were put on pastebin, and the URL is right there. They put down the login and password credentials for all these police sites because they were left at default. Now this is not the first time this has happened. When did it happen before? I took it out of this presentation because this just happened. It happened about 3 years ago where a Western hacker got sick and tired of all the negative press coming out about how the US was being attacked. So he did the same thing. All their Apache servers were left with a default login and password. So he put them on pastebin. Did I go and test these? Yes. Did I admit that to the FBI? Yes, I did. Because what's illegal in this country? What? No. That's a given. That happens all the time. Why are we here? Not with me, of course. Why are we here? Information security, right? Hacking is illegal, isn't it? Right? So please, if you're a hacker in the audience, don't let us know that because I believe this is being recorded. And I say that with all seriousness because I had a hacker in DC take exception to what I was saying and said, I'm a hacker and everything you're saying is wrong. And it was on videotape. Not that I would ever admit to being a hacker on videotape. Now, we all know that Cisco and all of the Western information security technology, specifically security technologies, are now banned by the Chinese government. Why? What's that? Well, that's beside the point.
Because NSA was backdooring.
Yes, sir, exactly. The Chinese do not view our technology as being authentic or legitimate.
We did that to ourselves.
Bingo. The ex-trader who shall not be named will not be mentioned, but we can all associate it with him. Now what has happened is the Chinese are saying that an anti-terrorism law has been drafted, that what that gentleman said about the legitimacy and authenticity of Western technology is now wrapped up in anti-terrorism legislation inside China. And of course our president said, well, you can't do that. The Chinese came back and said, well, it doesn't matter what you think. You're American, we're Chinese, you're going to respect our anti-terrorism laws because you've already proven that your technology has backdoors in it. So why would we trust it? Interesting, yes? And here you have the Chinese press coming out. They're not too pleasant about our president. Politics aside, they do not like him. Now, let's continue on to China. So what happened in 1949? We've already kind of skirted around the issue of Mao Zedong. What was happening? Chinese Revolution, the first one, right? Mao Zedong had Japanese insurgents. He hired them to push General Chiang Kai-shek off to Taiwan, didn't he? He said, I am the ruling, we're going to reform China in my mind's eye. And when we're doing this, the military commanders in the field were told this basic quote up here, to create aspects of disinformation so that they and their decision-making loop are confused and we can basically win over them. This was 1949. Now, is anyone, you certainly may have seen my presentations on the web, has anyone in this room seen this version of SC Magazine before in the Chinese view? No one? Look at the shape of those words, folks. Yeah, it's a bomb. It's a kinetic device. This was written in 2011. What's interesting about this is these stories were written by academics, some of which are in the room here, written by commercial folks, private citizens, yes, the military, and political folks. Every one of those stories that were written in this magazine in 2011 talked about the challenge of cyberspace and how the Americans were going to come and invade them. Their fear of us invading them is historical, is it not? Who heard of the Boxer Rebellions? Every Marine in the room better raise their hand. What were they? The legations in Beijing, right? Foreign troops were stationed on Chinese soil. Historically, they promised that would never happen. What has never happened in America? Check. They have grown up with it. Their culture has come to the point where they will not let the internet be repeated when it comes to the physical world. So what is happening is they're now starting to worry in China, who has got that keyboard army that has to be defeated? Who is the strongest in the world? Who has the best hackers in the world? Who can answer that question? Thank you. Russia has the best hackers. Who's second? No. China's number 2 for intellectual property theft. And then who's a distant third? U.S. of America. If you take exception to that, please dispute it. I'm just telling you from the Chinese view, this is the way they look at it. But they are very concerned that we have militarized the binary world. Because what happens when the military decides to take something on in the U.S.? Number 1, we don't take second place. And number 2, what is it, message does it send to the rest of the world? What's a component command? Major, what's a component command?
They're responsible for carrying out operations
In their domain, exactly. Fantastic. They are responsible for carrying out their operations in a particular domain. In this case, cyberspace, which is interesting because when the U.S. military militarizes something, what happens to the rest of the world? What do? They freak out, don't they? They're like, oh shit, the Americans are coming. Okay, here's a digital attack perspective, folks. Granted, this goes back to 2013, but if you look on here, look at where the majority of those attacks are coming from. Again, this is an independent website. You can definitely go there. There's the URL. By the way, somebody from the university, will this presentation be available for everybody?
I can make it available on
Okay.
my website.
So if you can't write the URL down now, some of you probably are aware of this. Fantastic resource. You can pick any country by type of attack, by type of port, and take a look at the binary activity that's taking place from it. Fantastic resource. This is the Chinese perspective. All right, let's talk about hackers. But first of all, who is China? Number 1, it is the Communist Party, still a communist country. You've got the state and the army. Those are the 3 entities in China, period. Beside the fact that they have more billionaires than the rest of the world combined. That's another point. That was an attempt at humor. Okay. Nobody's laughing. Okay, all right. So there are 4 official and unofficial groups of hackers inside China. And I'll go through each one of these. First is the Communist Party up there. Second is the PLA, the military. Third are the state-owned enterprises. And the 4th are the dark guests. What happened to that presentation? Must have been hacked. Yes. Yes.
Do they still have the Honkers Union?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yes. So the internet is a curious thing inside China because they realize that it opens up freedoms for their people that they otherwise should not have access to. It also gives them the ability as a country to realize the economic potential. So you can imagine if you are a leader who is trying to suppress anti-governmental dissent, you have to figure out how to do that. Some of the projects that have been in place have been the Golden Shield Project, which is also affectionately known as the Great Firewall of China. And then we had the Green Dam software. Has anyone heard of that before? This was a piece of software that was put on every computer that was sold in China. It was a program that was in place for 6 months. What it effectively did at the kernel level was shut it down if you searched something that was pornographic, anti-regime, or anything that was negative towards the Chinese culture. The problem is the Chinese government officials discovered that if they're doing a presentation, they put the wrong string of characters in there, it would shut down the machine automatically, so they stopped doing this. The original intent was to protect the Chinese youth, so it had a very good purpose. The problem is the party boys and girls couldn't go and surf their porn websites. Okay, so in 2010, what happened? Well, here in the United States, we had Cyber Command stood up, right? Where we basically militarized the binary world. In response to this, Xi Jinping came out and said, we must have something to protect our country against those external existential threats in the cyber domain from all countries, not just the United States. stability of the regime and making sure that the Chinese dream were ensured, were part and parcel of that. Now, you can imagine that purifying the internet is a constant challenge. We have seen in current events recently with the great canon that's come to be that they're using some of those very tools to purify their own internet against the rest of the world. It's rather ingenious. Of those of you that went to China, were you able to use LinkedIn, Facebook, or Google?
No, except through VPN.
Yeah, through a VPN you could. Interestingly, Facebook was open. Zuckerberg is learning Mandarin, as we all know. Facebook is open. LinkedIn is open. But Gmail is not. So the hosts in the Chinese military, as they're sending me the invitations recently, I wondered why there was no communication. And I'll be damned, they were using a Gmail address. And he apologized and he said, yeah, we couldn't figure out why we couldn't get out to send you an email because Gmail was blocked. So any sort of Google searches are definitely blocked there. All right, let's talk about the Chinese military and the hackers that are this part. This is probably the most controversial piece. The history of warfare inside China goes back to Sun Tzu. Who has a copy of the book of Art of War? Okay, keep your hands raised. I don't mean the art of network war or any of that silly crap. I'm talking about the true version. Any of those that put your hand down, throw them away. If you do not have the Art of War and have not read it and are in the security business, shame on you. If you like his book by Sun Tzu, then you like his great-grandson, Sun Ping. He wrote Military Methods, which is actually a better book. Ralph D. Sawyer did two fantastic translations. I reference them in my book. Got permission to use some of the quotes in there. Fantastic, fantastic books. Now, 1995, the military leader of information security and warfare inside China was Major General Wang Pufeng. Remember, this is the military. And then in 1999, we had War Without Limits by those two PLA Air Force colonels. And then in 2002, it became official strategy in the Chinese military, and it was called Integrated Network Electronic Warfare. Now, what's interesting about this is it's all based on this announcement right here. Look at the date, folks. 2009 is when the U.S. military said we will stand up Cyber Command. 2010, the Chinese started Informatization Command. The Russians started cyber military operations officially, as did the Iranians, all in response to this announcement right here. Now, in 2010, in July, then President Hu Jintao said he gathered his 5 generals. As you can see their names up there. Some of them have left the web since I've been doing this research. And he gathered them together and he said, gentlemen, create for me a Chinese version of Cyber Command which will protect our country against all external threats. Now, I'm not going to put the Marines on the spot and tell them that if I ask you to create a defense, what's your next natural reaction? Create an offense. So these generals up here, who are all pure Chinese, they're all card-carrying communists, they're all technologists and leaders in the Chinese military, but above all, Tamandosher Zhongguren. President Hu Jintao knew that if there was ever a question in their military mind about carrying out informatization and information assurance control in China, they would never waver. He knew they were not Uyghurs. He knew they were not Tibetans. He knew they were Han Chinese. Who has ever met a Han Chinese before? What do they look like? Their skin is yellow, and I'm saying this out of respect. Korean War veterans, any in the room? What do they say about the yellow hordes that attacked the forces in Korea? The yellow skin, I say that respectfully. Now, I went out to this military website as I'm doing my research. It talks about Chinese Cyber Command. Obviously, you have to take my word for it because it's in Chinese. What's interesting is I went back to the site probably 6 months ago. I got a 404 error. Oops, this page is currently inaccessible and unavailable. This was about the time where they came out here in the West and said they have a cyber army. It's gone, which I think is interesting. Now, Shenwei Guang, as you see up here, he is the civilian father of information warfare. Granted, he was a major in the PLA. In 1985, he was talking about information warfare from a military perspective. Who here in the room was on the internet in 1985? 6, 7. Wow. They were thinking about it as a military operating sphere. in 1985. I bet none of the Marines in this room, except for me and the Major, were probably even born in 1985, were you? Oh dear. But we've never taken second place, have we? No. All right. The second gentleman I want to introduce you to is Wei Jincheng. He talked about using information warfare as a method to guide the people's war, taking off of Mao Zedong to conquer those enemies that would pose a threat to China, using the internet sphere and the information realm as a means for protecting and attacking. He was only theorizing about it, but he's the one that started to talk about information confrontation, where military characteristics in the binary domain take on confronting one's enemies, fixing them in place, and defeating them. With a mouse and a keyboard. Are they going to throw them at him? Interesting. Yeah. And then we have Dai Shu. Here is another Chinese Air Force colonel. He has written a number of books on this particular subject. He comes out and says that he and the Chinese military are wary of losing that network warfare that is being posed on the rest of the world. He's written a number of books on this particular subject. And then, of course, so one question I'm surprised nobody has asked me, and here's the sort of the proof of it from a Chinese website back in August of last year, is how, because in the military we don't have hackers, do we, generally? We're just standing up cyber doctrine in the Marine Corps. The Army's in charge of everything, and the Air Force is technically ready, right? What? Okay, all right. I thought I may have said something inappropriate. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the proof in the pudding. The Chinese put out on a Chinese military website, if you go to this one here, I don't have the URL, but it talks about when they need to shore up their hacking army, they have basically told the Chinese civilian hackers, you will come to our aid as the military and become a force for readiness. Now, we've heard about it in the press, but it's never been confirmed, has it? Here is proof from a Chinese military website that they know that that is how their force is going to be multiplied when it comes to hacking. And then, of course, we have our government, the U.S. government, claiming that there are Chinese military hackers attacking our infrastructure. Has that happened yet? What?
Sure.
It has? Oh, I thought you knew for sure. Okay. I'm being coy. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. Yes, it has happened. Yes. So the Chinese are looking at us and wondering why we're causing all this angst and anxiety, wondering why we are blaming them for our hacking dilemmas.
Do you have a translation
Yes.
of this anywhere?
What?
Do you have a translation of these slides anywhere?
Are you serious? Do you have a checkbook?
Yes?
I'm being serious. You do have a checkbook?
I'm not going to get much out of it.
$3.85 an hour. You want the translation? I'd be happy to give it to you. No problem. Yes, sir.
Why only Chinese?
In terms of? I've already prefaced, you can ask any question you want about any other country.
No, I mean, why not any other country,
Such as?
such as Russia,
Uh-huh.
India, Europe, any, countries from other parts of the world?
Yes.
Why not?
Why not in terms of this presentation?
No,
Or in
terms
general?
of warfare or
What do you want to know?
why they are not in the news,
Well,
They don't hate us.
They don't pose
that's a can of worms. The gentleman's question was, how come we're not hearing more about the Russian military, the Iranian military, the North Korean? As I've already prefaced, I have given briefings, both classified and unclassified, on these particular subjects. Had I given you the triumvirate, we would have been here all afternoon. I simply picked China. There's not any day that doesn't go by where you can imagine that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are in the news. Do you know what an OPML file is? Who knows what an OPML file is? What is it? It's an automated newsreader feed. If you want what I use, you can have it. It's out on SlideShare, and I think it's on academia.edu. That's how I stay current on all this particular information. All right. And I wasn't being disrespectful, ma'am, but in terms of translation, you have to stop and ask me what you want to know. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to roll. Okay. So unrestricted warfare. Does anybody have a copy of this book in Chinese? You do?
No, I've got it in English, but I have the book.
Yeah, the PDF's on Federation of American Scientists.
I actually have a hard copy of the English book.
Interesting. Well, in this particular case, these two Chinese PLA Air Force officers talked about using internet as a means of unrestricted warfare, where there is no need for weapon systems or troops on the field. And they talked about asymmetric warfare, truly unrestricted warfare, and actually deterring war through the force projection methodologies. Interestingly, my host in China has told me I'm going to meet these two gentlemen. Yeah. Can't make this shit up. Now, on Chinese TV, you may have seen this before. These two academics from a university much like IIT got on TV in their uniforms and they said, "We teach combat development under conditions of informatization." This was in 2008. In fact, they went on to tell the students that we will basically instruct the students that they will use the keyboard and the mouse to create a deceptive environment for their adversaries so that if your political leaders do not acquiesce and bend to our terms, we will topple your country. Now, Major, if you got on TV in your uniform and said that, what would happen to you?
Be in jail.
You'd be in jail, yeah. These guys got on CCTV 7, Chinese military version, and said, this is what we're teaching our young people. Our cadres from an official perspective. Now, this is one of those very important slides I would recommend that you take a picture of, because on the 8th of November 2012, what happened? We said goodbye to Hu Jintao and hello to Xi Jinping. Why the 8th of November? What is the number 8 in China? It's a very lucky date. Hu Jintao gave his final words to the military commanders in the PLA and said, I want all systems to be informationized across all spheres of combat, logistics, all types of combat projection by the year 2020. This order has not been countermanded by Xi Jinping. In fact, it's been accelerated, meaning that all systems can now be controlled by the computer, either remotely or by those adversaries that would see them on the field of battle. Read the South China Sea, which is why I'll be in Quantico next week. Interesting. Small world, isn't it? Now, this is one of those slides. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the new face of their national security agency. These three senior colonels up here. On the left, you've got Bao Tingxiang. That's their NSA version of Cyber Command. They talk about satellites when it comes to controlling the space sphere, and then Earth satellite stations, meaning that any type of communications platform inside China or directed at China, they can take control of it militarily, either own it, pwn it, or destroy it at will. These three are responsible for that. Now, promise me, everyone in this room, on your way home tonight, you will not stop at Costco or Sam's Club and buy food, water, or ammunition. Promise me that. Okay? I'm being serious. Okay, recently in the press, we heard that this book was this revolutionary thing by a fellow out of a think tank in D.C. Look at the date on the slide. Yours truly, in all humility, has been talking about this since April 2013. I traded emails with him, and he said, oh my God, we know that the Chinese have Cyber Command out there because they came out with Science of Military Strategy. And I said, that's funny. You can buy it on Amazon. Why are you so worried about getting a correctly translated version? You know, by the way, it's been out there for 2 years. You just discovered this? Welcome to the party. Now let's get accurate and current, right? All right. 2015, this is where it gets interesting. And ma'am, here are some of the URLs. Some go to my website, so you don't have to translate the Chinese and pay me $385 an hour. But they talk about the Chinese military using informatization systems in 2015 and beyond in their combat systems. These are Chinese military commission websites, folks. Now you might be asking yourself, why would they put these in Mandarin for people like me to read? Well, we've already established nobody else in the room speaks Mandarin, right? So guess what they're doing? What is Mandarin language if you don't understand it? Where are my cryptographers in the room? Where are my stenographers? What's the ultimate form of cryptography? It's a language you can't understand, right? Beautiful, isn't it? Yikes. Okay, and then of course the PLA education continues with the University of Xi'an, where they're actually talking about military classes on cyber warfare in the universities. Do you have a cyber warfare curriculum here at the IIT?
Starts in the fall.
It what?
It starts in the
Starts in the fall. They're just now doing it here in China as well, perhaps.
You get to be an advisor.
Oh, goodness. You won't be able to handle that. Now, this general came out in Xinhua, which is their English newspaper, and he says information weapons are the key to future warfare. It's interesting because this is a Chinese version of the website that came out at the same time. If you go back and you look at the history of this general officer in the PLA, he is very much anti-American, anti-Japanese, and anti-anything that is not Chinese. And he's in the military. No racism here, right? Now, you do know that across all spheres of the Chinese military that they are indeed using cyber warfare as a weapons platform. Take a look at this URL and tell me why you might want to be a little bit shocked by it. Anyone in the room? Who said that?
Me.
What? What's wrong with that? Where does this server sit? If you go and you look at the post, it has the net address, the IP address, the administrative login, and password for every DoD component command out there and every sub-command sitting on a server in Hong Kong. That Nom de Guerre that you see right there, Dr. Cryptia, also a fellow Marine. Scott Turbin, if you follow information warfare in assurance, you know who he is. He sent me that, and Billy's like, is there anything wrong with this? And I'm like, you think? All right. Let's talk about that third group, state-owned enterprises such as Huawei. Common themes here are they have no organic ability for innovation. It is easier and acceptable by Chinese culture to go and exfiltrate that intellectual property rather than sink the money into the investment to create those innovations on your own. Everybody knows that. So part of that is the gentleman up there mentioned. They no longer want our technology. They are starting to build their own using Russian and Israeli, wherever that comment about Israeli technology was, and no longer using American technology. So they don't want to steal our IP anymore. You couldn't even give it to them. You couldn't even sell it to them, which is what I've been advocating. It's going to be stolen anyway. Why not just sell it to them and make a profit? Now, Huawei's links to the ZTE and ZTE's links to the Chinese military, we all know, and we've heard from Mike Rogers, certainly, on the House Select Committee on Intelligence, that Huawei is this evil empire run by Ren Zhengfei, who was a communications officer in the PLA. Why was he not still in the Chinese military, some might ask? In 1949, his parents supported Chiang Kai-shek. So when they did the background check on him to see if he could be a communist card-carrying member, it came back rejected. And they said, we have a very long memory. You did not support Mao Zedong. You must get out of this man's army. So he said, but I'm still Chinese. I'm still going to support the economic initiatives. I'm going to create Huawei. Sorry, didn't mean to lay some folks there. Now, who's heard of a Canadian company called Nortel? Oh, good. So what happened? They entered into a joint venture with a Chinese telco company, right? Signed agreements, everything's fine, it's legal, we don't need to worry about it. The engineers in the room, that's you folks, started to advise the leadership of Nortel, the Canadian telecom company, that they were starting to see their innovations with Chinese markings in markets that Canadian telco had not been in yet. The executive officers of these companies said, don't worry about it, we have a JV, the Chinese would never steal our intellectual property. It's never going to happen. Now, an allegory to this, when I was in the Netherlands speaking at their NSA version, I had a young guy come up and damn near hug me. He said, I was a Nortel employee. I lived through this. Yes, it happened. So they went from becoming a Canadian company, being delisted, and became a Chinese telco. A year later, 2012, the Canadian government comes out and issues a super secret memo. Watch out for commercial entities in China. Your JV is not going to be worth it. What happens in April of every year from MI6 in the British intelligence world? They issue the same memorandum, so at least they're staying on it from a consistent basis. Canada, not so much. And then, of course, here's a statement talking specifically about Chinese cyber warfare and the need to watch out for companies that may or may not have intellectual property that could be assumed to be exfiltrated by Chinese forces. You can see some interesting names up there. The last group are the dark guests. Dark guests, Hacker, black guests, hackers. These are the folks that are the technical ability of the Chinese government. Inadvertent, indirect, unofficial proxies. If you post anything on the internet that is anti-Chinese, they will take down your website. The example I have up here is a hosting company called Codera. Who's heard of Codera? In Phoenix, Arizona, near GoDaddy. What happened? Company, one person posted something, the Chinese suck or something like that, in the VPN environment with all these commercial companies hanging off of it. The Chinese took down the entire web farm. Bad news. So don't post anything naughty about the Chinese because they'll hack you. What's interesting is I have met these hackers. You talked about the Honker Union. Have you heard of Wan Tao?
No.
Eagle Wan? Well, there he is up on the screen, right there. He is the grandfather of Chinese hacking. So where's that book? Well, you can see it up on the picture. So I'm standing there with my book. And the two gentlemen over on the side here are, they're both just really angry. And they knew who I was. And Wan Tao is, we're standing there having a conversation. And they said, oh, yeah, we bought his book. We're also using it as a manual. They didn't realize that I understood what they were saying. And I said in Chinese, well, I said, well, thank you very much. And they looked at me. Interestingly, Wan Tao, can't make this shit up, this guy right here, he looks at them and says, well, I was not on the distribution list for that. No, it gets better. And they said, well, we bought several copies. And this is when it was banned. And I said, well, how did you guys get banned copies? Huh. Interesting. Unless perhaps the Chinese government had bought them for them. So a unique linkage there. What was really frustrating, you can't see it by this gentleman's backpack strap there. He had a little thing called the Eagle Globe and Anchor on his t-shirt. And I asked him to reverse that shirt and take it off. And he's like, well, why would I do that? I said, well, look at me. What do I have on my tie clasp? That's very offensive that you're copying the Eagle Globe and Anchor and putting it on a shirt as if it's some sort of frivolity. So I made him turn his shirt inside out. All right. Here's what hackers do in China. If you have intellectual property or something of value to them, they will take it. It's already gone. Try not to even possibly protect it. You could sell it to them, but if you're in a technical company in the United States, it doesn't matter anymore. All right. I have changed these because the last 8 that I had were so maddening to some technical companies that I will just run through them quickly. They're much more politically correct. Isn't that sad? It sucks, yes, sir. They theorized about information warfare in 1985, created a cyber equivalent in 2010 in response to the United States. The most effective hacking cadre use Mandarin Chinese to hack and defend their country. Ergo, the 10-year espionage campaign that was suddenly discovered. They are motivated by the Chinese dream and the desire to keep them the middle kingdom, right there. Every other country and cause is subservient to them. You will acquiesce, you will become Chinese, in their view. They will succeed at stealing commercial secrets, maybe not so much anymore. On a recent briefing to the Israeli MFA, they were kind of curious, because that means their intellectual property is now going too. Chinese have banned Western technology as part of their anti-terrorism laws. They have equated America with terrorists. Oh dear.
So who were they stealing from? Not the US anymore?
Israel or Russia. Yeah. China knows hacking superiority and intellectual property theft will translate to effective use by the military, meaning they can take that and weaponize it. We all know that the Chinese invented Downton Abbey, correct? No, they did not. I was being facetious. Thus concludes my presentation. Do I have any questions?
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
A lot of people consider this paranoia, but not true. We do a DDIR report every year.
You're from Verizon.
Yes.
Why do you guys send me in advance?
We can.
You do? No, I'm saying, why do you send it to me?
Probably because of what I just saw right now. And
I was being coy, sorry.
definitely. And one thing for sure, we have seen, and when the person asked about why China, is because those data breaches the majority are coming out of that particular area and it's militarized. My only concern is that when we look at this at the federal level, I've been like out to NACO, and at the county level, city level has initiatives, but the county level, there's a concern. And what do you see when you have a full military coming at you with full-on cyber terrorism that includes their constituents, and we have a public sector, especially at the county level, that doesn't have a designated person that's CISO or anything, or able to keep them for longer than 3 years without them going to the private sector.
Have you ever heard of Article 31 of the U.S. Code? Posse comitatus. Posse comitatus, which says that the military cannot be used against U.S. civilian forces unless it's waived by Congress. We have Cyber Command, but they are to protect the military aspect of it. They're not federal law enforcement yet, unless they're approved by the president. That's why I gave the comment earlier. Please do not go home and buy, or on your way home, ammunition, water, and food, because you think that the economy is going to collapse. At every level, municipal, county, state, federal,